I'm Chris Nessie, host of Behind the Mic, Voices of the EPN, a part of the Education Podcast Network, just like the show you're listening to now. Shows on the network are individually owned, and opinions expressed may not reflect others. Find other interesting education podcasts at edupodcastnetwork.com.
Hey, welcome back. Steve here, and today I'm talking with Mary Ruppenthal. She is an architect who's an associate principal at HED. Oh, this is such a cool conversation. We're talking about designing schools that meet the needs of the students and communities. Oh, this is so cool. You're going to love this. Thanks for listening. And oh, by the way, before you go, it would be so cool if you went to my website, stephenmiletto.com/reviews, and left a review. Could you do that for me? Say some nice words and maybe give me 5 stars. What do you think, huh? That'd be so cool. You are awesome. Enjoy the show.
It's the Education Podcast, your favorite show, with lots of groovy guests and they share what they know. So crank it up to 10 and let your neighbors know that here's another show with Dr. Steve Miletto. Teaching, learning, leading, K-12. Teaching, learning, leading, K-12. Teaching, learning, leading, K-12. With Dr. Steve Miletto.
Mary Ruppenthal is a registered architect and an associate principal at HED, one of the oldest and largest architecture and engineering firms in the country, with 400 plus employees and annual revenues above 100 million. They serve clients nationwide in a broad range of market sectors, including healthcare, higher education, mission critical, housing and mixed use, pre-K through 12, science, manufacturing and product development, workplace, community, and government. With nearly 30 years of experience in public and private sector educational, civic, and cultural design, Mary oversees pre-K through 12 and community education projects at HED and is a regular speaker at trade and industry events on the best practices of flexible and adaptive learning environments for tomorrow's pedagogical needs and the needs of tomorrow's workforce, and incorporating wellness into educational space design. She has devoted her career to collaborating with school districts in the design of innovative, high-performing educational facilities that enhance the user experience, maximize efficiency, and help shape the future for students of all ages. Mary is a member of the American Institute of Architects, AIA Committee on the Environment, School Energy Coalition, Architecture for Learning Environments, A4LE, where she is the board secretary from 2020 to now. This past year served on the NorCal chapter board as president-elect and is moving into the role of president in October. Design Build Institute of America, U.S. Green Building Council, and the Coalition for Adequate Student Housing, where she regularly presents lectures on sustainable school design, case studies, and advocates for evolving best practices in school design. Mary, thanks so much for joining me today, and say hi to everyone.
Good morning, Steve. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm really happy to join you in this conversation. Thank you very much for this opportunity.
Well, I appreciate you being here, and this is going to be a cool conversation. I've not talked to someone before who helps design schools and looks at different ways they look at it. I can't wait to talk with you. So, but before we go there, Mary, you're an architect. Why'd you pursue this, and what do you like most about what you do in that world?
Well, gosh, I guess I have my dad to thank. He was a contractor, and growing up at a very young age, every night after dinner, he would. When the dinner table was cleared, he would roll out his drawings and look at what he was going to be doing the next day. And he'd let me sit and ask questions. And I was just very curious about what he was up to. And he was somebody who was just constantly kind of fixing things, building things. And he really kind of fostered an interest in how things are come together and how to shape and create something. Gosh, I'm so grateful that to be an architect. I love it. There's various things we do every day. Some's more technical, some more bureaucratic. But I really love being a part of really shaping environments and working with people to really create spaces that allow people to really succeed and thrive.
That's cool. I have to say this because in part of my degree program, I took a graphics arts class, graphic drawing class. We're using, and I hate to date myself with this, but we're not using CAD. We were using big drawing tables and pencils and drawing paper and all this sort of stuff. And there were a lot of architectural prospects in that class. And one of the things I remember most about the students who were at the university doing focus on architecture was that they spent a lot of time in those labs and drawing labs, and a lot of times you run into them in the same building because they were staying there late night trying to deal with whatever project they were working on. Do you have to do that?
Absolutely, yes. I spent many overnights. I can't tell you how many. How many? Gosh, I think my record for staying up before a presentation, for a project presentation, was like 54 hours.
Oh,
Yeah,
geez,
we just
nice.
it's a labor of love, though. You really you kind of never feel like you're finished, but there is a point where you have to put your pen down and and it's an iterative process, though. Yeah, I love it. I spent a lot of sleepless nights, though, but I wouldn't take any of it back. It was really formative for me,
That's
and
cool. That's
even now, it's like meeting deadlines is an important part of our project, part of our job.
oh, I can imagine. I can imagine. I just always remember that because my degree path, crisscrossed with a couple different types of career fields, and the architecture students was like, because I was in there for similar sorts of reasons, trying to complete some projects and do it right with the drawings and stuff like this. And so I got a lot of advice from some of the people who are there for late nights. And I never forget that. So cool stuff. All right. So let's talk about trends in education buildings. I mean, why not just have a building that is one large rectangle with multiple floors, like were kind of typical in the 50s and 60s? A lot of them are left over. I'm sitting in one right now that was built in somewhere between 53 and 58, and his one big large rectangle, a lot of bricks, and an assortment of windows. Of course, they've redone it parts of it over the years, but why not just a big rectangle? What do you think about that?
Well, I think educational space comes in many shapes and sizes, and it can be successful even if it is a big rectangle. But spaces that really allow for adaptation over time, that allow for different types of collaboration, that allow large group and small group learning areas, kind of for retreat areas that are communal areas. So within there's a lot of school buildings that are rectangles, and some of them are wildly successful. I think it's kind of the thinking about what kinds of spaces really support positive educational outcomes, and what kind of community can you create within that rectangle. I mean, I went to high school I grew up in Wisconsin, and so I practice now in California, where there's a lot of outdoor classroom type spaces where there's not a lot of we try to minimize conditioned space as well as capitalize on connections to the outdoors and outdoor learning. But in Wisconsin, in areas of the country and the world where where weather kind of prevents that kind of environment, my high school, it was a big rectangle, but it had such a great sense of community. I remember after school, I'm a runner. I was running track and practicing for cross country, and it was like, 15 below outside. So it was inclement. We couldn't run outside, but after school, we were running through the hallways. We would run up to the wrestling room. We'd run down through the basketball where, basketball players are practicing, cheerleaders are practicing. We'd run through the corridors, past the library where the debate club was practicing. I mean, we just saw the whole spectrum of community within that one building. And it really, it was a center of our community. There was, PTA meetings happening. It really is how the school community and how can it serve the community, basically.
That's really cool. I had this a long time ago when I was working on my dissertation, I had studied the history of the size of high schools from 1900 to 1980. And one of the things I ran into was a couple federal moments in time where the federal government was focused on trying to reduce the number of schools that had less than 75 students in them. And it was amazing reading those reports, especially because many of those schools were built out of wood. And so they were trying to eliminate the schools made out of wood. And because guess what else they had? They had wood burning stoves in them, wood burning heating elements. And so there were lots of potential fire problems that they had. And it was kind of an amazing thing. So this is kind of it's always been an interest of mine, because that's what they were also doing in those days. Was they decided to if you eliminate those schools, well, then you got to bring them all together to go someplace. And so they consolidated between somewhere around the mid 50s to the 80s, all these schools. And so you have, in lots of rural areas, you have probably the memory of what used to be the mascot of some small school, and it's painted on a water tower or something like this. But now they have to go 30 miles away on a bus to go to the school that brought them all together. Well, in those time frames, they built them in these big, they started making these big brick buildings that were some general types, which is why you can go pretty much throughout the country and find certain ones that they may have no longer use it, but it's sitting there and it looks, hey, that looks a lot like the one I saw in Florida a few weeks ago, and or whatever like that. And then they got out of that, and I thought that was kind of interesting, because I'm not sure how imaginative those architects were about the space inside, but everything was kind of built the same way. And so that's why it's just cool to talk with you about this, because like this building I'm in now, one of the challenges I have is to figure out how to bring in somebody to help me redesign the way the space is inside. I want it to be more about instructional training and stuff like that, instead of like little spaces that are like just cubes in the room and in the building and stuff. But all right. So I'll stop babbling. Sorry about that.
No, that's really interesting, Steve. Thanks for sharing. Yeah, let me know if we can help you.
I will.
But yeah, we work a lot with older buildings that we're trying to adapt to be, to really serve kind of today's educational needs, which is a lot of flexibility, a lot of so working within the constraints of these buildings. It's how do you kind of create more connectivity? How do you say kind of break out a classroom and to create more openness to other kinds of spaces, so that a student doesn't have to be in the same room when there's different types of teaching and learning that needs to kind of happen. So it is a fun challenge to work with some of these old buildings that were designed kind of very traditionally as this one classroom with the front of the room. I mean, conversely, I've worked on some really beautiful old. I was working on an old brick classroom building that's over 100 years old, and
Wow.
It has just like these vaulted, really high ceilings, just tons of windows, and and then you saw in the 70s where the idea of educational environments was a little bit like, let's not open to the outdoors. We don't want the distraction. So when we deal with buildings in the 70s, it's like a common theme that there's, kind of, you don't have any view to the outdoors, and
Nice.
how do you start to bring more daylight in, and just the awareness that, it doesn't pull focus for a student to be able to look outside and get kind of a visual break and have a connection to nature. It's actually more beneficial, and studies are kind of showing that. Yeah, it's interesting, just the evolution of educational architecture. And yeah, my mom went to school. She grew up in rural northern Wisconsin, and she was from a very rural community where they had literally a one-room schoolhouse, like the traditional one-room schoolhouse. So she was in a class with everyone from the community, and they didn't split it up by age group. And she talks about her education, and it was like the older students were mentoring the young students, so the teacher actually had that help.
Interesting.
It sounded like a really, really kind of interesting experience for her to go to school with that kind of cross section.
Yeah, that's
of
cool.
students.
That's very cool, because you talk about getting to know people. I went to a school where my senior class was 578 kids, and at graduation, I'm sitting next to kids, because we're alphabetical, and you're going, we went to school together. It's like, it's as opposed to a one-room schoolhouse. Boy, you really get to know who your classmates were and stuff like that. That's cool stuff. Yeah, it's something else how it's progressed as areas have grown, and the suburbia has reached into the rural areas, and or ruralness has kind of in some cases kind of disappearing because the sprawl that's happened from some of the urban areas. But one of the things, I've worked as a teacher and administrator in many buildings of various ages. I mean, what's something that you take into consideration today when thinking about student needs?
I think the idea of strengthening community, creating a safe and inclusive environment is really key. I mean, we have so many lessons learned from the last 3 years. And we thankfully kind of health and wellness have come to the forefront, as well as the idea of what is, how do you promote kind of a safe, inclusive environment? And there's theories of the idea of small learning communities where even if you have a large student population, how do you kind of break up and plan a campus so that you have smaller learning communities of, the idea is that a number of within 250 students, people can still, anything kind of larger than that, you kind of start losing track of people. So A lot of districts are kind of implementing the idea of a small learning community within their campuses to kind of create these smaller communities, so you don't have people kind of falling through the cracks, where you have the ability to kind of really know everyone and kind of, eliminate that kind of feeling of alienation. And then in campus planning, how do we enforce those communities and communal kinds of spaces and different types of spaces, and really design for inclusion, creating community centers within the school campus is a wonderful idea that a lot of districts are embracing. We're working with a district that was able to get kind of bond funding for what they call family centers. So at the front of the school, there's kind of the front entrance administrative building, and then connected to it immediately adjacent, and they're interconnected internally as well. But there's a separate kind of family center that really helps to provide services for families, where to get help with food, where to get legal help, where to get English as a second language kind of training and support. So it's really kind of connected to the school, and it's really serving the community, and spaces at schools that really, the most successful school campuses are those really that do function as kind of a center of community, that have amenities for there's a school in San Jose that actually they use what is it called? They use a program to help folks in the community find space that they might need for, let's say you're having a wedding reception, and they have a space, a wonderful space that could be rented by the community. So I think it's called Facilitron, and it really helps to allow the community really to utilize school resources, and it actually puts funding back into the school, as well as provides a really dynamic, engaging campus environment. There's a lot of our schools that are functioning 18 hours a day, and they have after school performances, after school sporting events, after school training. I think just the idea of how do you really serve community and provide inclusion, health and wellness support, really allowing the entire community to kind of thrive, and the student population and the staff.
That's cool, because that's I think it's one of the things that a lot of, if they don't have kids in school, they may not, especially a high school, they may not realize just how often the building is used 7 days a week and into the night. And oftentimes it might be community groups, or it may just be that you have those different organizations that are using parts of the facility for doing whatever. And especially if you're in the north in the winter months, where you might have to do certain things where you're locked into the building too. That would be another thing that it's just interesting, all the different types of needs that happen there. I had this discussion one time when one of the systems I had worked with they'd hired someone who was supposed to kind of chill out the use of our HVA systems, and HVAC systems, and they trying. It was all about efficiency of electrical use and stuff like this. Well, he was trying to shut down the systems on the weekend, and we're like, what? I had to call him up because he had done all that, and he had the button. You could no longer restart anything or anything from the school. They put an electronic control system, and you had to talk to this man. And I called him up and I said, we have about 175 cheerleaders here in this building this weekend, and they were all here to do this activity, and you've shut the air conditioning off on them. And he's like, well, it's a weekend. And I said, yeah. And that kind of made that system have a talk with its principals and its efficiency experts. But that's a whole nother discussion for another time. That was a fun talk, by the way, that day. I'm like, no, you need to turn it back on, please, now. It's like,
yeah, that's interesting that he was kind of the master controller. A lot of actually the district I was just talking about uses a system that allows, and more and more this is happening. The energy management system is something that you can kind of pick up your phone and see what's happening in each classroom. And
nice.
So that's interesting.
Yeah, those are in the early days of that type of stuff. And so they put all it in the hands of this one person who then the it had been approved. All right, let's put it that way. You had to submit an approval form about it. It had been approved, but he saw that it was working and shut it down. it's like no. That was a very hot gym, and in the areas that I acquired it until we got it turned back on, but all worked out. So I read a recent article by you that appeared in School Construction News. 3 school building trends that are setting the curve. The 3 trends are: 1, schools as community hubs, which you've kind of talked about a little bit. 2, wellness at the forefront, and the last one, expanding CTE programs. Could you share a little bit about each of these trends? I mean, what's behind them?
Yes, I spoke a little bit about schools as community hubs earlier, but doing a deeper dive into it. We understand that schools have the ability to either reinforce socioeconomic differences, or to kind of help disperse and create a little bit more equity. And I guess a couple of examples of schools as community hubs. When I talk about community, it's like how do you create a healthy, positive school campus community, and things like a lot of districts offer subsidized lunch, and oftentimes there's a different location. Those students that get subsidized lunch need to get their lunch, and other students can go off campus. So you really kind of see that disparity. A lot of districts are taking the step to kind of eliminate that by creating one centralized student union space that really fosters an inclusive environment, as well as things like creating a card that gets loaded. If it's subsidized, it gets loaded that way. If you're not subsidized, it still gets loaded. Everyone has the same kind of card, and encouraging everyone, so you don't see that disparity. So that's just kind of a functional thing, but it makes a huge amount of difference because you're not separating where students need to go. Things like offering support on campuses. There's a district that we work with that has a store. It's not a store. It's like a student parent resource center, a little space in the student union where students, and it is, I say a store because it looks like a really wonderful little retail environment. It's probably 700 square feet, but you walk in, a parent can walk in, a student can walk in, there's clothes hung up. If they need a sweater, if they're cold, there's granola bars, there's water. So if you need anything, that's where they go. And so it doesn't, I guess prior to this project, there was like a little room that was like, it looked like it didn't feel like welcoming, and it kind of had that, now they've kind of changed it so that it's not, the stigma is gone, and people can go there. And it's kind of just the way that you think about space and how you shape the space to either make you feel good or make you feel, I mean, it's hard to put into words, but I guess, we all, I think, are cognizant of the fact that, spaces that you've been into, if you think about it, that make you feel, welcome, that make you feel included, that make you feel like a part of the community. And that's something that we really put a lot of thought into, really kind of how we engineer positive outcomes. In this building also, the teachers' admin is at the back of the building, but the teachers walk through the student union space all the time. So there's all this opportunity for teachers to encounter students throughout the course of a day, not just in the classroom. So as the students are studying in that library, is connected to the, it's like part library, part student union. So yeah, the teachers are passing through there all the time. So there's all this kind of, informal engagement with the students, as well as in that building. I've never, this is like something pretty unique that I was really surprised by, but it's like wildly successful. In that library space, there is a little room that has like 4 copy machines and just reams of paper. That's where teachers are going to print things, and that's open to students as well. So you also have, this workroom that is kind of open to both students and teachers. So it kind of blurs that line, and it allows those kind of, again, interactions with students and teachers. It's a little bit more personalized environment. So this is a district that is really focused on building community. And these are examples that we kind of look at. It's like, how can you engineer those positive outcomes? And then wellness, I spoke a little bit about before, is I think, the plus side of the pandemic was really bringing health and wellness and mental health to the forefront. And something that, we also are cognizant of is the fact that, connections to nature, just, during COVID, campuses that really thrived were ones that kind of were built and set up to have like the ability to have outdoor teaching. So when we designing kind of deep overhangs, especially in California where there's a need for shade. So, you don't necessarily need to have all these kind of separate shade structures, but how can the building architecture, how can you have deep overhangs that allow a class to quickly move outdoors or just, nimbly move outdoors, and just the idea of like what nature and the ability to be outdoors and connections to nature really does. There's a ton of research that really proves that, connections to nature, sounds of nature, natural daylighting, they really help performance. And it's not just academic performance. They improve attendance, and increase positive outcomes. So you have, more teachers and students who are happy to be in a school environment. And that's what helps people to thrive too, is one, you want to create a space that people want to be. And these really are second homes. I mean, these spaces, school communities are second homes. So when we design, we kind of look at it, from that lens, is how do you make it a space that people, want to be in. And so that's really, again, putting wellness at the forefront in our process. And then expanding CTE programs, we understand that students who are involved in CTE and kinds of, classes like you spoke about, drafting class, and, it was kind of a generational thing. I mean, when I went to school, we had woodworking, we had metal shop, we had drafting, and we had sewing, and we had home ec, and these were all classes that both boys and girls equally needed to take. They were like, but they were like classes that were so important because we were making and learning how to do. And I learned how to make an omelet when I was in these, in these classes. And I make an omelet at least once a week. And
Nice.
I always think about like, thankfully, I think this trend of like CTE, and, there was a time when we were like converting automotive classrooms to like, and the need kind of follows, but like biotech and that's CTE as well. But, career technical education, especially when there's like partnerships with organizations that can really offer, further career technical, but having the ability to have these on campus is really important, because these are types of programs that really do really prepare students for kind of their life after high school, whatever that looks like, but it allows all of us opportunity to really explore careers. So, students who are more successful after graduation often have been involved with CTE programs, and it's wonderful when communities look at what the need is around the community, just to really kind of establish those programs. In Sacramento, we have a lot of agriculture and farm to fork, so there's like a lot of culinary kinds of training, and it's wonderful when you can have a school garden on campus that actually provides the food that's being prepared, and so you have this real synchronicity with both with teaching and learning and really just doing. So I think all of these concepts are trends that are that hopefully just kind of remain embedded in the DNA of school development, because they're kind of really important concepts.
Oh, it's so cool. And it's so important. I mean, it's like, one of the things that, there's a period of time where everything was starting to be, replaced and reduced in the CTE programs. And they were doing other things and using the space for different things. For example, like lots of the welding programs were replaced. And welding is so important in our society. And you see the opposite happening now with them coming back and recreating the spaces for those. And automotive the same way, where a lot of those spaces had been, not that there's anything wrong with what they put in those spaces, but at the same time, it's like you did away with automotive. And that's a whole nother area. If nothing else, you don't have to, some of the kids, oh my gosh, went on to open their own car shops, went on to, be mechanics, went on, we sent some to a couple that became NASCAR type mechanics. and things like this, and just a whole career fields. But then we also had kids who took it and just were very good at changing tires and spark plugs and things like that. And I know we're going into a new world with all kinds of other stuff, but who knows what the new automotive shops might look like. But I think it's so important to have all those different types of programs. There's so many, the cooking and there's just so many of them that just pay off for the kids to have access to. And it's just a neat aspect of our world. And I hate the fact that sometimes there's these pressures to eliminate the programs. And so it's nice that we're in that rebuilding of all of them and actually being creative and seeing how many we can make happen. I tried very hard as a principal. I was trying to find a teacher, and I finally found the teacher, and then we started finding the equipment, and then we ran into all these rules in the state. Not that there's nothing wrong with those rules. I understand the rules, but I was trying to have fish farming going on. And,
neat.
And I had run into a person in the state who he was helping me. We got a grant to restart it was an urban school in an urban setting, and there was an old greenhouse. It was one of those cool glass greenhouses that they don't make anymore, or they're very expensive to have made for you. And inside were just a lot of weeds growing. And got the right teacher, got a grant, and got that reopened. And that same teacher then was interested in hearing my crazy idea about the fish. And then we found out that the problem with doing the fish was that there's all these rules about selling food and or growing animals for food. And a colleague that I ran into, he told me, he said, well, the way I solve it is at the end of the season, we just have a big fish fry. I said, that makes sense. There's just so many possibilities out there. I've seen schools that raise chickens and sell them to the community and such like that. And it's just a funny thing to go there when the chicks are being born and the kids are watching that process happen and all of that. And there's so many cool aspects of these different classes that really pay off, especially when you bring them to areas that long ago the farms have left and gone other places, and they've not experienced what it's like. So good stuff. I think it's so cool that you're working on, helping develop these types of setups for the buildings and such. One of the things that I've heard you talk about is the need for resilient, sustainably designed schools. Could you explain what this means?
Sure. Gosh, the importance of a school to be resilient and sustainable is, so I guess I'll launch into that. So, as human beings, we need to be resilient to kind of go through life, and our educational environments also need to be thoughtfully designed, especially, we're looking at, climate change, and we're, as an architect, I'm keenly aware of the impact that buildings have on the environment. So things like decarbonization and energy conservation have been something, things that are all of our responsibility to really be mindful of, and to be very rigorous and kind of protecting our resources. So when we design buildings, when we talk about sustainable, we're talking about, first starting with like passive design. How do you site the building so that it's optimally positioned to reduce energy consumption on the front end? That's like step number one. And then everything that we put into the building is, how do we design the system so that they're going to be as efficient, reduce energy costs as much as possible. The other sustainable concepts are things like natural daylighting is huge. But there's a difference between, abundant daylighting and excellent daylighting. You can have a classroom that is super well lit, but that's meaning that glare is coming in from, any eastern or western exposure at a horrible time of day and shining on the teaching wall and no one can see. So we really study, as we're designing buildings, we really study all of this, and we do energy modeling. So a building is biological, just like we are. So how do you create a building's, systems? There's respiratory, the HVAC system, there's bones of the structure. How do you design it? So all of it is and how can it have harmony, just in the fact of the art and what the spaces are doing to really reinforce positive educational outcomes. So sustainability is just the concept of building responsibly, building not just in the building itself, but to sustain positive outcomes, basically. And resilience, I think, certainly in the last couple of years, we've seen, and with wildfires too. It's like how do these school communities not only become like centers of community, but how do they support a community in these times when the school can become, in the worst case scenario, kind of a disaster relief area. So a lot of our schools, even if we don't have locker rooms, we provide infrastructure to allow for the ability to shower. So if these school spaces need to be kind of centers of community in an event of a disaster, certainly resilience is something in California that with regards to seismic, we look at how can it withstand earthquakes. Obviously, that's just part of the building code. But throughout the country, there's tornadoes and hurricanes, and really just designing with an eye towards schools being able to kind of provide, be a hub and support a community in the event of a bad situation. And then another idea or another point about resilience is that we have been talking a little bit about flexibility. For a school to be resilient also means that it is designed so that it can be adaptable to changing needs in the future. So, creating a building that will allow for change is something that we think of. How do we kind of design for flexibility in the future? So there's a concept called the open building concept that talks about, when you're designing, how do you ensure that in the future, if infrastructure needs to be changed, it can be done, as fluidly as possible. Designing a building so the structural system is an impediment, so you don't, like the more, CMU walls or like shear walls that you have, obviously we're always balancing the building code, but how do you create buildings that can be more easily adaptable in the future, just as a long range plan, knowing that education and programs require change, just like people. I think the idea of resilience being something that that can allow for adaptability over time is pretty important.
That's cool, and it really makes you think about a lot of different things, especially if you are of the age where you've gone through, you not only work on schools or designing brand new schools, but if and you've been in some other schools and seen how, in not so distant past, many of the schools that were designed were of certain types that were, basically big buildings with certain size rooms throughout them. And, today, the way, I don't know how all states work, but like the state of Georgia funds to a certain level from the state buildings that have certain size rooms, and you build to that capacity and such. And the communities have to come up with additional funds if they want to do something a little more outside the box type thing. And it's just fascinating to me because, as a kid, you may not think much about this. But then as an adult who works in schools, you start looking, you start thinking, what if, one time I brought a bunch of teachers together and I said, if you could start over in this building and they gutted the whole building and all you had were these classrooms, the space that a classroom was going to go in, what would you put in that space and how would you make it look? How would you do it? Because they didn't ask you in the beginning. Now I'm asking you. And it's interesting to hear what teachers say. And, first of all, many of them never thought about it that way. They just get what they get and they figure it out from there and make it their own. But to be able to think and to design, that's what I'm envious of what you do. It's cool because that's a neat aspect to be able to think about how the space will be used and what the potentials are for it and how could you make it flexible so it could be adjusted to do something different down the road as, they found the right program or got a different teacher in there, decided. I had a colleague when I was a teacher, he got rid of all his desks and he brought in all these reclining chairs and a sofa and a couple of low-lying tables so you could sit on the floor and just scooch up to them so they weren't well, actually how they were low lying was he cut the legs off of them, but made little stubs on them. But, you know, it was one of those things that it was the coolest thing. It allowed for that. And, you know, I know I'm getting into furniture now, but the building, the room itself, he had to pull some things out of the room that had been put in that really took up space as opposed to helping. You kind of mentioned some of that, you know, kind of the way they used to build some of the classrooms where they always had something at the front, so the teacher would stand on the other side of that thing, and it really wasn't movable, and cabinets and things like. There's all kinds of interesting things like that. But good stuff. All right. So one of the things I wanted to ask you about is that, you know, you talk about wellness. So what are some of the designs from the past that could cause issues with the wellness of today's students and teachers? What do you think?
I think you touched upon it a little bit. It's just, you know, spaces that only allow for kind of one type of learning. You know, that's very prescriptive. I mean, and you mentioned furniture, which is really important, Steve. Furniture can do wonders to both, you know, to facilitate different types of learning. You know, having a space that, you know, designing a classroom so that there's not really one central teaching wall. Every wall could become a teaching wall, or the corner if, you know, students are doing, you know, project-based learning, and they're, you know, it allows, like, how can the classroom support or how can the space support different types of learning? So furniture that's flexible, just the idea that you're not just sitting there, like when I was in high school in some classes, just, you know, it was lecture-based teaching, you know, a lot of it was, most of it was, and but, you know, there's a lot more collaboration happening in teaching now with project-based learning, and just the idea that a classroom can be kind of set up more universally. So, you know, we're, like you said, instead of having one kind of teacher space, you know, we used to have kind of a fixed space where the teacher was, allowing that to be a little bit more open-ended. You know, we have wireless has helped a lot, you know, there's multiple teaching walls, you know, spaces that just can be more dynamic. And I think on school campuses, what often happens is older buildings often were designed so that, you know, each room had a particular kind of function. So even like a performing arts theater, we're working with this district that was rethinking the idea of their performing arts, and really wanted to avoid spaces like, you know, it's our responsibility to maximize funding resources. So we never really want to design a space that is only going to be used part of the day, right? You want, number one, it results in kind of a stagnant environment. You have a room that's sitting empty a lot of the time. The more, you know, thriving school communities are those that, like, you know, it's just dynamic. Every space is kind of like being used for something. And so the spaces that can be used for multiple things are wonderful because they're not just for this. And that only happens 2 periods a day. So like the Performing Arts Theater, with a fixed stage and seating, there was a kind of awareness that, you know, gosh, this building, and it was at the middle of the campus. It was built in the 70s. You know, so it had no windows, like we were talking about. It was used mostly for the students throughout the course of the day, for like to sit in the underhand, like to sit in the shade around the building. So students were collecting around it, but the building isn't open most of the time because performances aren't happening very often. They were like, we only really have performances like 4 times a year. So we're doing a new theater, and unfortunately we could not, you know, adapt this building because it had, you know, too many, it would have been more costly to renovate it. And that's unfortunate because we always want to kind of breathe new life into existing structures when we can. But in this instance, you know, the seismic issues were prohibitive. They also found, like, you know, some dry rot issues. So it was going to be more of like a wormhole to go, you know, like, what else are we going to find? So in rethinking, we have the opportunity to rethink this theater space and really create a space that is not going to be a closed box most of the time, that people are sort of, you know, sitting around to get shade. So rethinking the theater concept, this building is not going to have the fixed seating. It's going to have retractable seating basically for 300. But it's a space that doesn't have an elevated stage. Actually, the stage is actually an area that is off of, it's like a performing arts building and visual arts. So there's classrooms off of the stage per se.
Gotcha.
That when you're sitting, let's say you're sitting in the seating that's not fixed, but you're sitting there for a performance, you're looking through the proscenium and you're seeing kind of the glass classrooms behind, that can be screened off when there's a performance. But then, you don't have a stage that's not used 99% of the time. And so, just not having an elevated stage as well, it was just kind of really rethinking it. Our theater consultant, his mind was getting blown constantly.
Nice.
And all of us were, but this building is going to be something that's used by students and the community all the time. It can be used for large gathering. They can have TED Talks in there. They can close it. But, then it's also used for display it's like basically the idea is that it's like a 24-hour talent show. Basically, the building is like becomes a canvas for what the students want to perform, for what they want to post in their gallery space. It can be performing arts. It can be rented for wedding receptions or by a local comedy troupe to be a comedy show. So it's I think it's just going back to the initial question, Steve, some of the issues with schools in the past are those that are designed, with spaces, kind of solely being one kind of function rather than allowing a little bit more dynamic use of it, of the building. And, that helps us too to right size campuses because we're not building as much. We're building spaces that are, they're being required to flex, right? And that's actually more beneficial for the school community, more beneficial financially for districts, and it's a healthier academic environment when you don't have these spaces that are like dead a lot of the time.
Makes so much sense. I mean, because in the traditional sense, like a junior high that I went to when I was in seventh grade, had the traditional sort of auditorium, which at one end was the stage, and you had this huge, all these rows that went way back into the back, and it really didn't function well although I had a health class in there, as well as got to see theater and then all the other things, but the health class was in there, and it only took a little dinky space, but to build instead a theater box, or kind of go with the black box theater sort of concept where it's a big box and you can manipulate the space like that is so awesome, because that means that space can be used for many things. I think that's awesome. It's incredible. It's just, there's so many things about buildings that I think if you can figure out how to make it flexible like that's so important. Good stuff. All right. So something I also read that you talked about is connecting with nature, and we've talked a little bit about this. What's one of the big things right there when you talk about connection with nature that you like to think about or focus on, or maybe try and do for the school?
I think, sorry.
I'm sorry, for the school is what I started to say.
Well, knowing how beneficial, there's a term called biophilia, which is really like a love of nature, and everyone has a kind of inherent connection to nature. All of us understand the benefits. If you think about, imagine, Steve, you're sitting on a beach right now, just watching the ocean. You can envision what that sounds like just by picturing it, your biological system is getting benefits because it's kind of instantly calming, and instantly reduces blood pressure. So knowing that nature and the connections of nature is so important to our physiological functioning. When we are building, we are thinking about that constantly in terms of designing how to infuse nature in the environment, both by views and connection, like a physical connection, but building a campus environment that that is connected with nature, having really wonderful outdoor learning spaces that have shade, and as much as you can introduce in the curriculum, that would be wonderful too. But things like materiality, things just like color and materials, how do we include patterns of nature in our architectural design? How do we incorporate local materials to things that just really kind of ground all of these details, bring nature inside and other concepts of nature, like the fact that like views, just kind of understanding where you are in the space. That's how we, when we're, let's say you're hiking, having an outlook is really important. So building campus communities that provide opportunities for outlook, opportunities for retreat, areas that are spaces that are kind of smaller, quieter spaces, and the idea of furniture comes into play here too, in terms of like, different types of seating areas, just the kinds of things, and what kind of materials and patterns, lighting that is not just, a bunch of fluorescent lights, but actually just lighting that has really positive color temperature, lighting that has the ability to create different types of spaces. So, I mean, we look, just principles of nature are everything, just the geometry of nature and how wonderful it is. I think it really, like, infusing it in the spirit of everything that we do and bringing kind of nature in as many ways as we can is just, we understand the empirical research, really proves that these kinds of spaces are beneficial. They're spaces that people want to be. They're spaces that people thrive in. They're spaces that people perform well in academically, but also, thrive in from a mental health kind of standpoint.
It's so awesome to take into consideration this type of stuff, because it's I've been in schools, whether old or new, that block out the world, and then I've been in others, old or new, that actually bring a whole world into you, because you got a wall of windows, or you've got something that they actually thought about, something you mentioned before, which is the way the light comes into the building at certain times of the day and stuff like that, and just being able, sometimes I think just being able to be able to see trees or bushes or something that or a space where it's actually an outdoor classroom area or something that's just incredible like that, to be able to escape out of the building and to know that there is an outside. It's just something else to be able to think about stuff like that. I love that just trying to think about how that could be designed into the building. Space so important. One of the things I got to ask you, because you do presentations, you talk with people. If you had the chance to talk to an audience of school board chairs and superintendents, so notice who I've got here. This is a group of the people who make the decisions about the spending of money, right? What would you want to tell them to take in consideration when looking at redesigning a school? Like you're pitching a school concept to them about like you're talking about, like with nature and the resiliency, and talking about being a community hub and expanding the CTE programs. I mean, what type of thing would be the foremost thing that you'd want to put in that presentation to talk with them?
The idea of putting value in buildings and of valuing it. Certainly, there's always economic factors that we're trying to balance. We try to do the most with the least amount of money, but for everyone understands kind of the fact that first we shape our buildings, and thereafter they shape us. So, and that's a Winston Churchill quote that I love, because Nice. It's so true. I guess the idea that students students are so smart, they can see the value that you're placing in them and the types of educational environments that's being provided for them. One of and I guess to design spaces, look at where students want to hang out when they're not in school. What kinds of spaces are those? And so, yeah, students aren't stupid. They understand that. So I want to tell the story. I was working on a project in East LA. It was a replacement classroom building and a replacement performing arts building. These both were burned down by a rival gang in East LA. So this was a 3-story classroom building and an auditorium, performing arts building for the community. And school district is at Los Angeles Unified School District, who really I love working with. They're very innovative. They do value and illustrate the value of education in their students, in their communities. And so when this building was, as it was shaping and when it, like, as the students were starting to see, like, this is a building that had, like, really durable materials, but also was very, very dynamic and had all of, just, it was very student-centered environment, but very quality materials and just beautiful. It was really just all about them and serving the students. To see and hear them say, and they were like, "Gosh, this is like a college environment," and they were like, I heard them multiple times, like, "This is for us." Like, you could just see the sense of wonder as it was. I mean, and yes, it is for you. This is how important you and your education are. And another cool aspect of that project is we had a local art component, or we had some art pieces that we found some local artists. One was the graphics on the performing arts building that a local artist did this amazing photography of dancers in motion, and it became signage on the building. And then this other piece was dedicated to Jaime Escalante, who was a teacher, an amazing teacher who actually taught there. It was Garfield's High School in East LA. And it was this really amazing piece that was on the side of the classroom building that, nice. Just talked about the impact he had on students there. And it was such an amazing project. But I think that's what I would tell, and school board member superintendents, when redesigning your schools, it's the value that you put in education is representative of the kinds of environments that we provide. And, we work with districts of all types, and we always have financial constraints, and we're always maximizing what we can do with that. How do we solve, a number of challenges in one graceful solution? But it's wonderful when we can get beyond kind of just the idea of, like, warm, safe, and dry as a concept of what a school environment needs, to some of these other concepts of what really helps students thrive, and to really illustrate that in the environment, so that they really can not only really thrive. How do you provide an educational environment that really empowers students to learn? I mean, our educational environments are a reflection of, how do we embed that, like, interest in learning? So we try to create, turn the classroom into a 3D teaching tool. And kind of really engage students in the buildings. One of my favorite projects was involved like a bus drop off at the front of the school that actually was a functioning sundial, so they could, if their parents were picking them up, they could see what time it was just by reading the sundial in front of them. How do we embed learning in the educational environment as well? I guess those are a lot of requests or calls to action. I think, as we love working. I mean, I love engaging with our school district clients every day and just collaborating with them to really see how we can meet their goals and exceed their goals, and really provide these environments that ensure and optimize success.
It's so cool because you think about it's. You're calling upon people to let their imaginations think about what would be a good space to have for kids, and still be protective, but be able to engender the idea of how they think and in their imagination and creativity, and being able to do the different things that they are able to during the day. And I think it's cool to be able to have those discussions with the people who make those decisions. Which is, because as opposed to building a big rectangle with no windows or little bitty windows that go across the top or something like that. Not that there's anything wrong with that. That's one of your favorite designs, but anyway.
Well, the sense of pride, I mean, I think, what's interesting is, like, when you design, when you put value in the environments, the sense of pride that comes from students and the sense of ownership they take, because there were folks in the community that were like, we were using this channel glass material that, is really interesting and beautiful in the science lab. So you have this, like, muted daylight coming in beautifully, cool. Daylight space, but it's kind of muted. And People were saying, gosh, this is going to get vandalized. And, it's like, no, the more, when you show the value that you're putting in students' educational environments, the sense of pride and ownership is huge. And so it goes the opposite. If you, create a building, bare bones building, and it has students don't really have the same sense of pride in it. And those are, we see it every day. Those are dilapidated schools that aren't really well taken care of sometimes have issues like that, like with graffiti and stuff like that.
Gotcha. And, it's something else. This is really cool talking with you, Mary. Mary, before we finish up, because we're getting close, if someone wanted to follow up and connect with you and or learn more, where would you send them?
Well, our website, HED Design, is a wonderful starting point. You can see some of our project work, learn more about us, our commitment to justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion. I'm on the website and in leadership, and my contact information is there, but I'll also share it now. You can send me an email. My email address is Ruppenthal, it's MRUPPENTHAL @HED.design. Yes, please reach out. I'd be happy to hear from you. Answer any questions or provide any resources I can.
Very cool. Well, I'll put that information in the show notes so it's easy for them to find. So I got one last question for you, and it goes like this. Do you have a teacher in your past who made a difference in your life? And if so, who was it? And what would you say if given the chance to say thank you?
Gosh, that's a hard question, Steve. I have so many. I started out by kind of sharing the impact that my dad had on me and shaping my career, but I want to say that my mom is probably the most amazing teacher I've had. She raised, I'm one of 5 children, and she had 20 jobs. She was a gardener. She was canning vegetables. She sewed clothes for us. She is a master baker. She was a chef. She was the doctor when we all got hurt. She was a lawyer. I mean, gosh, she was she had 20 jobs, and she did all of them just amazingly. And both my parents are just huge inspirations for me. I think the fact that she too, like my dad, taught me, to do, and how to do for yourself, and how to be kind of, self-sufficient, how to craft things. And also she, grew up in kind of a small town outside of Milwaukee. But she was such a pillar of the community, volunteering at church. She volunteers at schools, still teaching kids to read, volunteering at Alzheimer's places, and just, she really, her community, the importance of community to her, was really instilled in all of us. And my parents are probably my most formative teachers, but I do have a lot of other teachers. I think I feel so fortunate in my life to just have had, and I think even today I'm like a lifelong learner. So I learn from everyone. I still, as long as I've been doing this, Steve, I learn every day. I'm like, wow, this is something new. Very cool. And, I learn from our younger staff, and, their teaching goes both ways. So, and the environment is often called our third teacher, the third teacher in school environments. And, I think the environment is always something that always, should be teaching us a lot about what as well every day. So, I think try to wrap that up in a nutshell, but it's pretty expansive.
Oh, that's good.
I'm very grateful to have had so many wonderful teachers, and on a daily basis still. And I loved learning from you today. I loved the conversation we had. So I so appreciate what you're doing, Steve, and I'll look forward to learning more.
Well, thank you so much. Appreciate it, Mary. This has been awesome. Thanks so much for talking with me. It was awesome talking with you about modern school design, needs and trends to keep in mind, which is really, really cool. And I'm wishing you the best in all you do.
Thank you. Likewise, it was a pleasure. Thank you so much, Steve.
Hey, you have been listening to Teaching, Learning, Leading K-12, a podcast to help you help kids achieve their dreams. Teaching, Learning, Leading K-12 is a member of the Education Podcast Network. Podcasts for educators, podcasts by educators. Teaching, Learning, Leading K-12 is a member of the podcast network based in Canada called Voice Ed Radio. Voice Ed Radio, your voice is right here. The opinions expressed on Teaching, Learning, Leading K-12 are those of the guests and host. Teaching, Learning, Leading K-12 is intended to share ideas, advice, and suggestions. Teaching, Learning, Leading K-12 is produced for educational purposes. Hey, thanks for listening. It would be awesome if you visited my website at stephenmiletto.com and connected with me, left a review, and listened to more episodes. And by the way, you could also share it with your friends, with your family, and your colleagues. Thanks so much. You're awesome.